Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to go in search of a worldview in our continuing class on apologetics. What is a worldview? It's the way that you look at your world. One way it's been described as a window to the world. Imagine, if you will, a window in your house, and you can look outward. You don't see everything that's out. You only see that which is framed by the window. And a worldview is a frame by which you look out and see your world. It's the glasses through which we see. And, some people seem to have maybe rose-colored glasses, or some people maybe have glasses that look like with blinders on, where there's certain things they don't want to look at. But your worldview allows you to focus and to see reality. Now, here's a map that helps us to explore this idea. Of course, it's a map of the world, but notice it's not the way that you're used to looking at it, and so it gives you a different perspective. Maybe as you look at this, you'll see some things that you hadn't noticed before. Here's another example. Again, it's a map of the world, but just laid out a bit differently. Of course, whenever you're looking at the world, you're looking at a globe, and so trying to put that on a flat screen, there's all sorts of different ways you can do that, and they will all be different, and none of them will be quite the same. Here's a picture. Perhaps you've seen this before, and if you haven't, then you'll ask yourself, is this a young girl or an old woman? And depending on how your mind sort of picks it together. Now, let me just say, if you're looking at it and seeing the young woman, she's facing toward our left, and then her head is back turned away from us as she's looking over her right shoulder into the distance. You can just make out her cheek and her left ear, and it looks like she has some sort of a necklace around her neck. Or maybe you see the old woman, and if you do, her face is in the foreground, and she's looking down toward the left. You can see her nose and her mouth, and her chin sort of sticks out a bit, and you can just barely make out her eyes that are partially covered by her hair. Two different ways of looking at the same picture, and I use this by way of illustration to talk about how we view our world. In his book, The Universe Next Door, Sire says a worldview is a set of presuppositions or assumptions which we hold sometimes consciously, sometimes even subconsciously without realizing it, about the basic makeup of our world. Now, most of your worldview lies under the surface. It's not immediately obvious. A bit like an iceberg. Icebergs. When you see a big iceberg floating in the ocean, most of the iceberg is below the surface. Likewise, most of your worldview you don't even realize there. It's the world in which you live as you perceive it, and oftentimes we don't even realize where we have gotten that worldview. We've soaked it up from people, from our parents, maybe from the Bible, or maybe from some other writings. But very often we've just soaked it up without even realizing it. Now, what a worldview does, one's worldview determines how the events and circumstances of life will be understood when you read what's happened in the newspaper, when you read a history book, to understand what's going on, how you accept things, or don't, or how you try to reject certain ideas, how you act upon different things in your life. All of those will come back to what is your worldview. Now, how important are religious beliefs to one's worldview? Paul Herbert, he was a missionary anthropologist. He says theology is not simply a system of beliefs to be added alongside the others. Theology is the master blueprint on which all other blueprints are mapped. That is, what you believe about the unseen world will affect how you see the seen world. We all have a worldview that informs us, whether we realize it or not, a worldview that tells us about the universe in which we live. And it impacts the way we see, the way we understand reality. 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 5, Paul says we are taking every thought captive. Notice that phrase, to the obedience of Christ. Whereas I don't think he's talking only about this worldview idea. I think that includes that the Christian is called to deliberately obtain his worldview from the scriptures, from the Lord, from his faith, that we are seeking to do that. And notice taking something captive, those are warfare terms. And indeed, we're in a spiritual war, and the battleground is our own minds, our own thinking. And so we should be deliberate about that. Now, let's talk about some different worldviews. One of them is naturalism. The subtitle we're using here is The Silence of Finite Space. In one of the philosophies under here would be secular humanism. There is, by the way, a religious humanism that focuses upon, yes, the Lord, but the focus is upon how he has interacted with people. But a secular humanism says that we are mankind, and that's really all there is, or at least all we know of. That God is removed, if he exists at all, that the universe was self-activating. And so naturalism says nature is all that there is, that human personality is only an interrelation of chemical properties. You are just a sort of a mass of protoplasm that happened to come about by accident. You are really just a bad joke, just a bad accident. Joke actually presupposes personality. So you're not even that. You're just a chance happening, a blob of goo that happened to come along, and when you're done, that's all you will ever be. Values, right and wrong, these are just man-made constructs. They don't have any reality. There is no such thing as right. There is no such thing as wrong. It just is. Right and wrong are what you choose to make it today, and you can change your mind tomorrow and make it entirely something else. If you look at just some of the value systems, value decisions that have made in our own lifetimes, you've seen some huge swings. It used to be thought that it wasn't proper to abort a baby, and then the Supreme Court passed a law and said, "Well, no, that's okay." And people just sort of assumed, very oftentimes, that okay, I guess it's okay now. What had been wrong before is now assumed to be okay, and then just just a few days ago, the Supreme Court made another decision. No, it's wrong, and and notice how it goes back and forth. I remember one of the presidents saying, "No, I believe that uh, that marriages should be between a man and a woman." And once he got elected, he said, I was talking to my kids, and they asked about that, and I changed my mind." Well, either he was wrong before or he was wrong afterward. Naturalism says there is no right or wrong. It's just whatever you decide it to be. Values are man-made. Carl Sagan had a popular show. Actually, it was based upon a book that he had written called Cosmos, in which he was an astronomer bringing his perspective, and his perspective was the book actually starts off with this line: "The cosmos is all that is, and all that was, and all that ever will be." Just space and the universe out. That's just all there is. In other words, he's making the presupposition there is no God, there is no greater force. It's just the cosmos. And at one point in his talk, he pulls out a pocket watch and he says, "Now look at this watch. It has an intricate mechanism, and you wind it, and it keeps the time, and it has an obvious designer." And he went on to say, "And one cell of your body, one just little tiny portion of your DNA, is a billion times more complicated than that pocket watch. And yet, it just came about by chance." Now, I never did follow his reasoning about how that happened. Um, but that was his presupposition, and he was sticking by it. It was his worldview that he had adopted. It was the glasses that he was wearing to see his world, and everything was understood through the lens of those glasses, through the lens of that belief system. C.S. Lewis, in his book entitled Miracles, he says naturalism is self-refuting because it is inconsistent with the validity of reasoning. Now, think about this: um, if we are all just a mistake, if we are all just a bunch of goo, then reasoning doesn't really exist. There is no reason for reasoning any more than a rock can make a decision, or a mud pie can make a decision. You can't really make decisions. You just think you're doing that. There is no reason for your reasoning. Next, we come to nihilism. And this is what Sire speaks of 0 point. It involves an extreme pessimism, a skepticism. It says that, again, nothing has meaning, nothing has value, nothing has significance. There is no such thing as dignity. There is no such thing as worth, human worth, or any other sort of worth. We just all are. Notice it's just the next logical step in that materialistic universe. It's just saying, look, because we're just a chance happening, then your life has no meaning. To live or die, there is no rhyme or reason in any of it. There's no significance. There's no dignity. You can't talk about the dignity of people, or nobility, or anything like that. Those are just things we invented because they sound nice. That human beings are conscious machines with no ability to affect their destiny. They're going to live and then they're going to die, and it really doesn't matter what you do in between. That the human animal only invents values. We only invent this idea of right and wrong to get what we want. It's all self-serving. There is no value system. There's no such thing as right or wrong. So if you feel it's right to exterminate all the Jews, then go ahead and do it. Who's to stop you? As long as you can get away with it. There is no right or wrong. If you want to say that I hate all black people or all white people or all anything, just do it and get it over with, because there is no such thing as right and wrong. Now, existentialism takes that to the next step. Jean-Paul Sartre was the one who popularized this idea that humanity is central. Notice you're taking a big jump here to say humanity is nothing, because nothing is nothing. Nothing is anything. But humanity is central. People make themselves into who they are. And so, therefore, since we have made ourselves to be something, we'll go ahead and do that. It doesn't really have any outside value. It's just our own opinion, but we're the biggest guy around, so our own opinion is what counts. That knowledge is subjective. Whether you really know something, or there is no really to know anything. There are no absolute moral values. Again, what you do is neither right nor wrong. It's whatever the majority says. As long as the majority is strongest, they can do whatever they want. Of course, if somebody stronger than the majority comes along, then he gets to do whatever he wants. History is uncertain and really even unimportant. There's no reason to study history because it's just a bunch of chance happenings that are taking place. You can't learn from it. There's no reason to learn from it. Just do what you can and do what you want. It's whatever you want that's important. That the supernatural then is brushed aside as not necessarily being non-existent, but being irrelevant. And so, why bother with God? This philosophy, this presupposition says he hasn't bothered with us, and so we don't need to bother with him. If he exists, fine and well, but don't bother me with that. Now, existentialism can have one of two ideas. It can be an atheistic existentialism, or it can be a theistic existentialism. Notice it doesn't necessarily say there's no God. It might take the approach that yes, there's a God, but if he has not entered the realm of my daily experience, then what's the point? Who cares? Now, existentialism then says, and this is Paul Tillich, his quote, even the theistic version says that the Bible, though religiously true, is historically untrustworthy. And this was the approach that he took. Here's someone who supposedly a Bible scholar and yet doesn't really actually believe that the Bible says anything in what I'm not sure he would. Somebody else coined this phrase. That the Bible doesn't really contain true truth. It's just true for you, true to me. It's truth is whatever you decide it to be. Now, a different philosophy, and yet one that in some ways has joined hands, Eastern pantheism. Of course, remember, theism says that there is a God, doesn't say necessarily who that is or who or what that is. The term pan just means all. So every pantheism is saying that everything is God. God is God, and you are God, and this book in front of me is God, and this computer screen that you're looking at, that's God. That that many, if not all, roads lead to the one. Well, there isn't really one God because everything is God. So that's the only one that there is. Ideas are not really important because, it's just one idea bouncing off another idea. We all have ideas and they all have equal weight. Time is just a figment of our imagination. It's not really real. And history is cyclical. We live, we die, we are reborn, we do, it just, things just continue, world without end. And a desire to enter the undifferentiated one. In one sense, each person is God. And so just get in touch with the universe and you'll have gotten in touch with both yourself and with whatever God there is, because there is no personal God. It's just all the one, and you're already part of it. Your goal is to realize that you're part of it. Now, that actually came to the West in the guise of what's called the New Age movement. The New Age movement came in the 1980s, probably as a result of some of the things that were happening in the 1960s, and then it was sort of a flash in the pan with its prophetess Shirley MacLaine pictured here, but then. Nowadays, it's no longer a New Age movement. The movement has stopped moving, but there are a lot of presuppositions that were associated with the New Age movement that have become just standard thinking on the part of a lot of people today. So the core experience is said to be cosmic consciousness. Again, this is like what we talked about with pantheism. Just realize that you are one with the universe. Now, if you're one with the universe, that means that there's no such thing as rights. Uh, you and the cockroach are basically the same. You just happen to be a little bit bigger than he is. There is no personal God, only a mysterious force. Think about um, George Lucas and his fiction Star Wars. We're going to talk about that in a second. There's only a mysterious force, no Lord of the universe, unless it be us. You are God, and I am God. I remember Heinlein wrote a novel to that extent back in the 1970s, probably one of the forerunners of this New Age movement. It borrows heavily from animism and from other pluralistic ideas, that there are, what's the old saying? There are many roads to Rome. Well, not all roads actually take you to Rome. Some roads actually lead you away. But the saying is that all roads lead to Rome, and that all roads lead to the truth. Of course, truth in parenthesis, because what they've done is redefine truth, because there is no truth, and that's going to lead us to postmodernism. So there's a connection between these ideas. Remember Yoda in Star Wars, may the force be with you. And what was interesting was when Lucas in his first movie came out, the force was described as sort of this energy that binds everybody together, but it was impersonal. And yet, when he came out with his next three set of movies, not the first, second, or third one, but the ones that came after that, you saw the Force deciding things. Wait a minute, I thought the Force was impersonal. Impersonal things don't decide anything. It takes person to make decisions. And so he could not be consistent within his own little tiny made up world. And I'm not downing Star Wars. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the characters. It was fun to watch, but I don't get my theology from it either. And so we move now to postmodernism. Sire calls this the vanished horizon, that all stories are equally valid. You could see we were all already heading in this direction. Uh, it changes from being to knowing. That is, am I actually, do I exist, or do I just know about what seems to be. I can't talk about knowing what is because there is no is. If all stories are equally valid, it's it's what all stories are perceive themselves to be. Paradoxically, reality is forever hidden. There is no reality, or if there is, it's not something that you can come to know. The idea here is that you really can't know anything. Um, think about that epic postmodern movie, and I'm talking about just the first, not all the ones that came afterwards. Matrix. Reality is just what you perceive it to be. Any story but my own is considered to be oppressive. So I've decided what my story is. I've decided my identity. If I decide, gee, I think I want to be uh, a female ballerina, a 6-year-old ballerina, then who are you to tell me that I can't do that? We've actually seen some of these things in our society, taking fruit in recent years. So any story but my own is oppressive. Social good equals whatever society takes it to be at the moment. So if society says abortion is a good thing, then it's okay. If society says abortion is a bad thing, then it's bad. It's whatever you can get the majority to go along with. That becomes the good, or there is no ultimate good or bad. That becomes the good or the bad for the moment. And we continue to use those words, good and bad, good and evil, but they don't really mean much under postmodernism. With postmodernism, the postmodernist stares blankly at any claims to truth and shrugs, well, okay, if it works for you, that can be true for you. We've heard that term, that phrase so often that it doesn't mean anything. When somebody says, well, this is my truth, and sometimes you'll hear people even talk about the Bible. Well, to me, that means, well, wait a minute. Either it means that or it doesn't. It's not whether it means that to you or not. It's what is truth. And even Christians can find themselves talking, if they're not carefully, can find themselves talking in such a way. There are many kinds of truths, and consequently, and I'm quoting Nietzsche here, there is no truth. What he said was in denial of truth. Nietzsche was the one who said God is dead, and he wasn't saying that there's actually a physical God out there or a spiritual God that actually exists. What he was saying really was the idea of God just has no more relevance. So there is no God. There's no truth. If he exists, he's irrelevant. And of course, Nietzsche is dead and buried, and so I would say, well, Nietzsche is the one who's dead, not God. God is very much alive. Instead of the truth shall make you free, the postmodernism it claims that freedom shall make you true. Notice the way that turns around, because truth is just what you made it, and so if you can just be released from all ideas and just sort of go with what you want to go with, truth, your identity, who you are, whether you're male or female or 83 things in between, that's just what you decide, and you go for that, and everybody else sort of has to go along with you. Notice that each one of us now become the authority because there is no authority. Here's a little. This came from the Tampa Tribune. Notice your way. They've thrown out the ideas of the right way or the wrong way. It's just whatever you decide it to be. That's actually our educational system today. Philip Dick, and he was a novelist. Actually, if I remember, he committed suicide. Wrote a number of both novels, some that were made into movies. Each one always took the idea of questioning both reality, but also, am I really me? It's sort of an interesting novelist. He says, reality is that which, when you stop believing it, doesn't go away. He had real issues with trying to figure out what reality was. And like I said, I understand ultimately committed suicide. Deism now. We've moved from materialism, there is no God, to pantheism, everything is God. Now deism is the idea that God created, but then he went off on a long vacation and hasn't been back. So yes, God may have created, but he is distant. He's an intellect to be recognized, but not a person to be worshipped. And both Einstein and Voltaire were deists, as were a number of the founding fathers of this country. I think Thomas Jefferson was another example of that. He may be an architect, but he's not a lover or a judge. The idea of having any kind of relationship with God, no, God is so other that he has nothing to do with us. The cosmos is not fallen or abnormal. This is just the way it's supposed to be. Let me just say that's wrong. I think the cosmos is broken. This isn't the way it's supposed to be, and something within ourselves tells us that whenever we are faced with tragedy, whenever we are faced with death, that's not a good thing. Death is actually an enemy that robs us of our loved ones. Now, the cosmos in deism is a closed, linear cause and effect system. You say, well, what's the first cause then? And deism says, well, there's something out there. They usually like to talk about an original creator or whether it's a force but not a personal God who creates. A clockwork universe that God allowed to run on its own, but in which he never intervenes. God as the first cause, and this is the point, he never intervenes within his creation. That miracles do not happen. Now, let me just say, with regard to miracles, I think miracles are rare. I don't think they happen every day in the sense of that which is unusual. If miracles happened every day, then we wouldn't have any natural laws. We wouldn't have any, we wouldn't think this is what normally happens because the miraculous would be normal. Miracles, even in the Bible, miracles don't happen every day. They are actually far and few between, although there were in biblical history bursts, like in the days of Moses and Joshua, there was a number of miracles that took place. But even throughout the lives of Moses and Joshua, they would happen at certain times, and then you'd have much of the rest of the life of Moses or of Joshua, where there weren't quite that many. But then after the death of Joshua, you see miracles. I'm not saying there are none, but relatively speaking, they are greatly reduced in number for many hundreds of years until you get to the days of Elijah and Elisha, and all of a sudden the miracles start up. And Elijah speaks and the rain stops, and he speaks and it comes back, and fire comes down from heaven, and the dead are raised, and Elisha also. In fact, you get to Elisha, and it's miracles times two. There's even more. But then after the death of Elisha, they largely, not completely, but they largely stop. And so you have a long, 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 long period of hundreds of years until Jesus comes, and then they begin again, both Jesus and in the early church. But then after that, even by the time you're reading the Epistle of the Hebrews chapter 2, sort of indicates that miracles, by the time that the author is reading it, we're not even sure exactly who the author is in Hebrews. I tend to think it's got at least Paul's influence, if not his actual writing. But by the time that epistle is being written, they're talking about the miracles that were there in the previous generation, but they seem not to be that much evident by the time this is being written. Now, Christian theism, then, notice this is a world charged with the grandeur of God, and I am a Christian theist, unabashedly. Says that knowledge, death, reality, ethics, history, and the realness of human beings are all focused on God. That is, God is our creator, He is our sustainer. Um, it's under His shadow that we come to life and that we face death. That ethics are because He said this is right and that is wrong. History is His story, and so to describe it as Paul put it in the book of Acts, in Him we live and breathe and have our being. Therefore, we as Christians have, or we ought to have, I think, a biblical worldview that sees that God is infinite, He is personal, He is triune. That's the Trinitarian in us. Only one God. We have to always, whenever we talk about the Trinity, we have to start off by saying we believe in one God. We don't believe in three gods. but one God who exists in three persons. That history has a purpose, that it has meaning. There is meaning behind history, and that it has a goal. That at the goal of history is when Jesus comes back and his kingdom will fill the earth. Now, how that's going to take place, we've actually got some classes on future prophecy. And there's one I'm teaching starting this week. By the time you hear this, it will probably be over because it's running this summer. But yes, I believe that history actually has a goal that will be fulfilled in and through Christ. We believe that our source of knowledge is through revelation. That is, God has revealed Himself. We wouldn't know a lot about God. Actually, let me correct that. We would not know anything about God. And you say, well, couldn't we look at the universe and see God's handiwork? Well, yes, but that's revelation. That's what we call general revelation, where He has revealed Himself generally just through what He has done, through mankind, through the stars, through things we see in a microscope. But He has also revealed Himself specifically and specially through the prophets, through Jesus, and through His Word, through the Scriptures. Those are all elements of special revelation. And humans were made to know God. We were actually made so that we might come to know Him. Now we have cut ourselves off because of sin, going all the way back to the Garden of Eden. We were made to know God. We were also made to know ourselves, that we have a self awareness that I think goes beyond that which animals have. That we have an awareness of ourselves, and we were made to know creation, that it was a created thing, not just that it exists, but that creation itself has been created. We're going to come back and look at this in a future class. Now, Pascal, and we're going to close speaking of Pascal. Blaise Pascal lived in the 1600s. He was a Christian. He had had some issues with the church in his day. That's sort of understandable. Um, Now, he comes up with what he calls his wager, that there's a sense in which when you make decisions, you are sort of placing the ultimate bet. Now, this wager is not an argument for the truth of Christianity. He's not. He believed Christianity was true, but he's saying if you were sort of on the fence trying to decide if it's true or not, he doesn't give this as an example. What he does is he gives it his wager as a reason why one should seek the truth of Christianity, to try to determine whether or not it is true, instead of just saying, "Well, I don't care. We'll find out one of these days." That he said that is the silliest thing. It's the most dangerous thing that you can do. Wager then says, look, if Christianity is true and you believe, then you have everything to gain. After all, you gain eternal life, and you gain heaven, you gain your presence with the Lord. But if Christianity is true and you do not believe, then you have everything to lose, because you lose eternal life. Instead, you go to hell. You are cut off from God. You experience eternal punishment. Now you say, well, what if it's not true? Well, he goes on to say, if Christianity is not true and you believe, then you really don't have a lot to lose. You have believed something wrong, but did that really matter in the long run? You lived and you died, and if it's not true, then oh well, you believed wrongly, but you really didn't lose all that much as opposed to what you gained if it is true. And he went on to say, now, if Christianity is not true and you do not believe, then again, you have nothing to lose um, because it made no impact on you. So he said, look, um, your, your belief, you are betting against nothing to lose or everything to lose. And what are you going to do? He says, it's foolish to ignore it. The one thing you will decide, doing nothing, just ignoring God, is to decide. But if you believe, notice you have everything to gain, and if you don't, you have everything to lose. If it's true, are you willing to bet not just your life, are you willing to bet eternity to assume, to be absolutely certain that Christianity is not true? And so this was Pascal's wager, and he said it's a dangerous thing to ignore that which God has given because you have everything to lose.